The moment I walked through that dark mahogany door, I felt a jolt of certainty in my chest. I had either made the best choice of my life, or I had just stepped into the biggest mistake I could imagine. Patricia Whitmore was standing near the entryway, perfectly posed like she lived for moments like this. Her face tried to form a welcoming smile, but it did not work. It looked like she was doing two things at once, smiling for good manners and showing disgust at the same time. The expression reminded me of someone who had taken a bite of a lemon while trying to look nice for a photo. Her eyes scanned me slowly, not as a person, but like an item being judged. Her gaze moved from my simple navy dress to my modest flats, then to the small earrings I bought at a drugstore. I could almost see her brain working, adding invisible numbers, guessing my income, guessing my background, and deciding I had nothing that mattered. Then she leaned toward her son, Marcus, my fiancé, and whispered something she clearly believed I would not hear. I heard every word. She said I looked like the help who had wandered in through the wrong entrance. Right then I understood something important. This was not going to be a friendly family dinner. This was going to be a test. Maybe for them. Maybe for me. Either way, I knew the evening had just become very, very interesting. My name is Ella Graham. I am 32 years old. And I need to admit something. For the past 14 months, I have kept a secret from the man I was planning to marry. Not a tiny secret, like eating the last slice of pizza and blaming it on the dog. Not a medium secret, like still sleeping with a childhood stuffed animal. My secret was huge. I make $37,000 a month. Before taxes, it is even more shocking. After taxes, it is still the kind of number that makes accountants stare, check the paperwork again, and ask if there is a mistake. I am a senior software architect at one of the largest tech companies in the Pacific Northwest. I have been writing code since I was 15 years old. I sold my first app when I was 22. I have spent my adult life climbing the career ladder step by step. I hold 3 patents. I have spoken at international conferences. I have stock options that could make a normal person feel dizzy. And Marcus thought I was an administrative assistant who could barely afford her rent. The truth is, I never directly lied to him. When we met 14 months ago in a coffee shop, he asked what I did for work. I told him I worked in tech. That was true. He nodded like he understood. Then he asked if I handled scheduling for executives. I smiled and said something vague about supporting the team. He filled in the rest on his own. He assumed what he wanted to assume. And I never corrected him. People might ask why I did that. Why would I let the man I was dating, the man I was falling in love with, believe I was struggling financially when I could have bought his car 10 times over? Because I learned a lesson long ago from the most important person in my life. My grandmother raised me after my parents died when I was 7. She lived in a modest home in a quiet neighborhood. She drove an older car. She shopped at normal grocery stores. She never wore flashy clothes or expensive jewelry. She did not try to impress anyone. She taught me to cook simple meals and enjoy small pleasures. She taught me to work hard, be kind, and stay humble. She taught me that my worth was not a number in a bank account. But there was something I did not know until much later. When she passed away, I was 24. That was when I found out she was worth several $1,000,000. She had built a small business empire when she was younger. She invested wisely. And even after she became rich, she chose to live simply because she believed character mattered more than appearance. She left me everything. She also left me a letter I still keep in my nightstand. I have read it so many times that I could almost recite it. In that letter, she wrote something that stayed inside me like a permanent light. She said you only see a person's true character when they believe no one important is watching. When they think you have nothing to offer them, when they believe you are beneath their notice, that is when you see who they really are. So when Marcus invited me to dinner at his parents' estate, when he hinted that this might be the night things became serious, when he warned me that his mother cared deeply about first impressions, I made a decision. I would give the Whitmore family the test my grandmother taught me. I would show up as the simple, quiet woman they expected. I would wear modest clothes. I would drive my old car. I would speak humbly about my life. And I would watch how they treated someone they believed could not help them. Someone they believed was beneath them. Someone they believed had nothing to offer. Before you judge me, before you call me manipulative, let me ask you something. Have you ever wondered what your partner's family really thinks of you? Have you ever had that uncomfortable feeling that the smiles were fake and the compliments were empty? Have you ever wanted the truth, even if it might hurt? I wanted to know. I needed to know. Because I was not only considering marrying Marcus. I was considering marrying into his family. And families do not fade away after the wedding. Families can last forever. Now, there is a part here that sounds like those story channels online. If you are enjoying this, imagine me asking you to comment where you are watching from, and share the time where you live, because I love seeing those messages. Then I would take a breath and return to the story. The Whitmore estate was exactly what I expected and still managed to surprise me. The driveway alone was longer than some streets I have lived on. The gates were black iron with gold accents, because plain iron would not have been impressive enough. The lawn was trimmed so perfectly it looked like someone measured the grass with a ruler. As I drove my 12-year-old Subaru Outback up that perfect driveway, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My makeup was simple. My hair was pulled back in a low ponytail. I wore my grandmother's small gold studs, the only jewelry I had on. I looked like someone who did not belong there. Perfect. Marcus met me at the door. He kissed me, but the kiss felt slightly staged, like he was doing it for an audience. His eyes flicked to my dress, my shoes, my lack of accessories. And in his expression, I saw something I had not seen before. Embarrassment. He was embarrassed by how I looked. I locked that observation away in my mind. Inside the house, everything screamed wealth, but it did not feel warm. It felt like a display. It felt like new money trying hard to look like old money. Crystal chandeliers hung everywhere. Oil paintings covered the walls, framed in gold, but I could tell many were prints, not originals. The furniture looked expensive but uncomfortable, chosen for appearance, not for living. And there she was, standing in the entryway like a queen guarding her kingdom. Patricia Whitmore. She was in her early 60s with a face shaped by excellent surgeons. Her blonde hair was styled perfectly, like a helmet, probably held in place by strong hairspray. Her dress was designer. Her jewelry was real. Her smile was completely fake. She extended her hand like she was granting me an audience. I shook it. Her hand was limp and cold. There was no warmth. No welcome. Then she whispered that comment to Marcus about me looking like the help. I smiled and acted like I did not hear, but inside I was alert and calm. This night was going to show me exactly what I needed to see. If I had known everything that was waiting for me, I might have worn armor instead of a navy dress. But I have always believed the best armor is information. And I had done research before coming. The Whitmore family owned a chain of car dealerships across 3 states. Not movie star luxury brands, but respectable mid-range cars that regular families bought. Marcus' father, Harold, inherited the business from his father and expanded it over 30 years. Patricia married into the family at 23. Right away, she started climbing the social ladder with the determination of a person who always wanted more. They had 2 children. Marcus was 34 and worked as a marketing manager at a company unrelated to the family dealerships. That was apparently a sore point with Harold, who expected Marcus to take over someday. And there was Marcus' older sister, Vivian, 38, who treated family money like her personal piggy bank. I had found this through public records, social media, and careful searching. I had seen photos of lavish parties, charity events, and fancy gatherings. I had read articles praising Patricia for philanthropy, but when I looked closer, many donations came with tax benefits and good publicity. None of that prepared me for meeting Vivian in person. She arrived 20 minutes late. I later learned that was her signature move. Being noticed mattered more than being respectful. She swept into the living room wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Diamonds hung from her ears and neck like she had fallen into a jewelry store and stood up covered in everything. She looked at me and said one word. Hello. No warmth. No nice to meet you. No smile. Just hello, delivered with the coldness of a freezer. I smiled and said hello back. Then she turned away and started talking to her mother, clearly excluding me, discussing a charity event and whether the florist had been fired for last month's disaster. I stood there holding a glass of water, feeling about as welcome as a vegetarian at a steakhouse. Marcus hovered nearby, uncomfortable, but he said nothing. That was the second thing I noted. Harold Whitmore was different. He was a large man who probably had been athletic long ago, but now carried the comfortable softness of wealth. He shook my hand with a firm grip meant to impress, but it felt tired, like a performance. Still, his eyes were sharp. He watched me with something like curiosity. He was trying to read me. There was also another guest at the dinner, someone I did not expect. An older man named Richard Hartley. They introduced him as a longtime family friend and business associate. He was in his late 60s with silver hair and eyes that seemed to miss nothing. When he shook my hand, he looked at me longer than normal. There was a flicker of recognition on his face that confused me. Did I know him? I could not place him. He did not say anything, but throughout the evening I caught him watching me with that same thoughtful, searching look. Patricia led us into the dining room. It was decorated like someone had unlimited money and no taste. The table was long enough for a royal banquet. The chairs were upholstered in fabric that looked like silk. Each place setting included more forks than I had ever seen. I counted them. 6 forks at each seat. 6 forks for one meal. I have seen surgeries performed with fewer tools. Patricia noticed me looking at the silverware and smiled. She said, with a voice full of fake sympathy, that she supposed I was not used to formal dining. I told her my grandmother always said the forks did not matter as much as the people you share the meal with. Patricia's smile tightened slightly. Vivian made a small snorting sound into her wine glass. And dinner began. The first course was a soup I could not identify. It probably cost more per bowl than my weekly grocery budget. Patricia used the moment to begin what I later called the interrogation. She asked where I grew up. I told her a small town in Oregon. True. She asked about my family. I said my grandmother raised me. True. She asked what my parents did. I said they passed away when I was young. Patricia made a sound that was supposed to be sympathy but came out like a drain clearing. She said it must have been difficult to grow up without proper guidance. I told her my grandmother gave me all the guidance I needed. Vivian leaned forward, her diamonds catching the chandelier light. She asked what my grandmother did for a living. I said she was a businesswoman. Vivian raised her eyebrows and asked what kind of business. I said small ventures, nothing exciting. The truth was my grandmother built a company and sold it for millions, but that truth did not help me tonight. Patricia moved to my job. She asked what I did now. I said I worked in tech. She asked if I was a secretary. I said I was more of a support role. Patricia nodded knowingly, Like this confirmed everything she already believed. She said every team needs support staff. Marcus shifted in his chair, uncomfortable, but still did not speak. That was when Vivian decided to drop a name into the conversation, like tossing a stone into calm water. Alexandra. She said it casually like she was talking about the weather. She said she ran into Alexandra last week. She said Alexandra was doing wonderfully. She said Alexandra family business was thriving. I watched Marcus' face carefully. Something flickered there, then vanished. Guilt, nervousness, something like that. Patricia grabbed the moment with excitement, like she had been waiting for it. She said Alexandra had always been a lovely girl. Accomplished. Perfectly suited to their lifestyle. She said Alexandra and Marcus dated for 3 years. Did I know that? I said I did not. Patricia smiled as if she enjoyed surprising me. She said it was such a shame when they broke up. Everyone expected them to end up together. Alexandra family owned a luxury car import company, which would have been a perfect match for the Whitmore dealerships. The message was clear. Alexandra was the right choice. I was not. I looked around and noticed photos on the wall behind me. Christmases, birthdays, graduations. And in at least 4 photos, a beautiful dark-haired woman stood next to Marcus, her arm linked with his, smiling brightly. Alexandra. Patricia followed my gaze and said nothing. But her satisfaction was obvious. Vivian pushed harder. She said Alexandra was still single. She said it was surprising no one had taken her yet, almost like she was waiting for someone. I turned back, smiled, and said Alexandra sounded like a remarkable woman. Vivian blinked, thrown off. Patricia recovered first and agreed Alexandra was remarkable. Then she added, with the subtlety of a hammer, that she hoped I would not feel too out of place in their world, given my modest background. I asked what she meant by modest. Patricia's smile sharpened. She said not everyone is born into advantages. Some people live ordinary lives with ordinary jobs. And there was no shame in being common. Common. She called me common. Something shifted inside me. But I kept my face neutral. I had come to learn the truth. And the truth was appearing right in front of me. Marcus finally spoke. He said his mother did not mean anything by it. He said she was just protective. Patricia patted his hand and said of course she was protective. A mother always wants the best for her son. The unspoken ending hung in the air. And you are not the best. Harold cleared his throat and tried to change the subject. He asked about my hobbies, whether I enjoyed anything outside work. I said I liked reading, hiking, and cooking simple meals. Nothing fancy. Vivian laughed and called it adorable, like a child listing favorite activities. Richard spoke for the first time since we sat down. He said there was something valuable about simple pleasures. He said his own grandmother lived modestly and was the happiest person he ever knew. Patricia shot him a look that could curdle milk. Richard ignored her and kept looking at me with that searching expression. He asked what my grandmother's name was. I said Margaret Graham. Richard's eyebrows lifted slightly, like that name meant something to him. But he did not explain. He only nodded and returned to his meal. The rest of dinner continued the same way. Patricia and Vivian took turns asking questions designed to remind me of my place, which they believed was far beneath them. Marcus made weak attempts to defend me, but he never truly pushed back. Harold stayed mostly silent, watching with the tired look of a man who learned long ago that arguing with his wife was pointless. And through it all, Richard watched me. By the time dessert arrived, I learned everything I needed to know about the Whitmore family. They were snobs. They measured humans by money and social connections. They saw me as a mistake that needed fixing. But I also learned something else, something I did not expect. Marcus was not the man I thought he was. The Marcus I fell in love with seemed kind, attentive, and interested in me as a person. But the Marcus sitting there, letting his family tear me apart with only weak protests, was different. Weaker. More focused on his family's approval than on protecting me. I wondered which Marcus was real. I was about to find out. After dessert, Patricia announced we would have coffee in the sitting room. The men drifted toward the windows to talk business. Vivian excused herself to make a phone call. Patricia said she needed to speak with the housekeeper and would join us soon. That left me with a moment alone and a chance. I excused myself to use the bathroom. Marcus pointed down a long hallway lined with expensive, pretentious artwork. I walked slowly, noticing how the house felt cold, like a museum. It looked impressive financially, but it did not feel like a home. The bathroom was easy to find, but I was not really searching for it. I was searching for information. For understanding. For a clue about what I had walked into. Then I heard voices through a partly open door. Patricia voice. And Vivian voice. Something about Patricia tone made me stop. It sounded urgent and sharp. Every polite instinct told me to keep walking. But I did not. I moved closer quiet, staying in shadow. Patricia said they needed to deal with this situation quickly. Marcus could not be allowed to make this mistake. Vivian agreed. She said she could not believe Marcus brought me here. She thought I was just a phase like his vegetarian phase in college. Patricia said this was more serious than a diet. She said this woman could ruin everything. My heart sped up. They were talking about me. But what came next made my blood feel cold. Vivian said the timing could not be worse. They needed the merger with the Castellano family to go through. And Marcus needed to be with Alexandra for that to happen. Patricia agreed. She said the dealerships were in trouble. They needed the Castellano partnership to survive the next fiscal year. The floor seemed to shift under me. So the Whitmore dealerships were in financial trouble. Vivian said Marcus was supposed to keep Alexandra interested while they worked out the details. That was the plan. Alexandra family would invest money, and in return they would gain access to the Whitmore distribution network. Patricia said Marcus assured her he was keeping his options open with Alexandra. Options open. While he was proposing to me, I leaned against the wall, mind racing. This was not just snobbery. This was strategy. This was calculated. Marcus was not only weak. He might be using me. But why keep me around if Alexandra was always the plan? Vivian answered that question. She called Marcus a fool. She said he actually seemed to like me, this little secretary, this nobody. He was supposed to use me as a placeholder until the deal with Alexandra was finalized, but he was getting attached. A placeholder. That is what I was to them. Patricia said they would handle it. She said they would announce the engagement tonight, get Marcus publicly committed to me, then find a way to break us up before the wedding. Once they had Alexandra secured, they would discover some terrible secret about me to justify ending it. Vivian asked what secret. Patricia said they would invent one if necessary. I stood there frozen, listening to them plan the destruction of my relationship like they were planning a dinner party. Then Vivian said something even worse. She said at least I was too stupid to suspect anything. She said Marcus picked well in that regard, because I was naive and trusting, probably grateful someone like Marcus noticed me at all. Patricia laughed and agreed. I stepped back quietly and moved down the hallway. My hands were shaking. Not from heartbreak. From anger. They thought I was stupid. They thought I was naive. They thought I was desperate. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I found the bathroom, splashed cold water on my face, and stared at myself in the mirror. The woman looking back at me was not broken. She was thinking. I came tonight to test Marcus' family, and they failed completely. But the test revealed something I did not expect. Marcus was part of the problem. He was not only caught between me and his family. He was actively deceiving me. Now I had a choice. I could confront him immediately. I could walk into that sitting room and expose what I heard. I could burn everything down in one explosive moment. But I knew what would happen. They would call me emotional, dramatic, bitter. They would claim I proved their point. No. If I responded, I would respond my way. On my terms. With a plan they would never see coming. My grandmother taught me one more lesson that mattered right now. She taught me that when someone underestimates you, they give you a gift. The gift is surprise. Patricia and Vivian had just given me that gift. They had no idea what I was capable of. I fixed my makeup, smoothed my hair, and walked back to the sitting room with a calm smile. The game was just beginning. When I returned, the atmosphere felt different. The furniture had been moved slightly. The lighting was adjusted. Patricia stood near the fireplace with excitement barely hidden under her fake calm. Harold lingered near the doorway, looking uneasy. Vivian pretended to examine a painting, but I caught her smirking at Marcus. Marcus stood in the center of the room nervous. Too nervous. When he saw me, his face formed a smile that tried to look loving. He walked over, took my hands, and said he wanted to ask me something. I felt the trap closing. Marcus said we had not been together long, and his family could be overwhelming, but he knew what he wanted. He said he wanted me. Then he got down on one knee. He pulled out a ring. It was big and flashy, exactly the kind of ring Patricia would approve of. But when I looked closely, I noticed something else. The diamond looked cloudy. The setting looked uneven. It was the kind of ring that looked impressive in soft light but would show flaws in bright light. It reminded me of Marcus himself. Marcus asked me to marry him. Patricia beamed behind him. This was the plan. Public commitment first, disposal later. Now that I knew their strategy, I understood the whole design in a heartbeat. They wanted to announce the engagement tonight, keep me in place for appearances, and still keep Alexandra waiting for the business merger. I could have said no. I could have rejected him in front of them all and walked away with my dignity. But the story would end too quickly. I thought about the hallway conversation. I thought about being called a placeholder. I thought about them planning to invent a scandal. I thought about how they believed I was stupid, and I thought about how satisfying it would be to show them how wrong they were. So I said yes. Marcus slid the ring onto my finger. Patricia clapped like she was watching a show. Vivian offered congratulations with the warmth of winter. Harold shook Marcus' hand and told him he had done well. Richard watched me with an expression that felt knowing, almost like he suspected the story was not finished. I met his eyes and gave him a small smile. The rest of the evening blurred into false joy. Champagne appeared. Patricia talked about engagement parties and guest lists. Vivian discussed venues and flowers. Harold mentioned potential business opportunities that might come from joining families, though he hesitated, clearly unsure what my family could possibly offer. Marcus stayed close to me, playing devoted fiancé with surprising skill. If I had not heard the hallway conversation, I might have believed him. But I had heard it. When it was finally time to leave, Marcus walked me to my car. The night air was cold and sharp. He asked if I was okay. He said he knew his family could be difficult, but promised they would warm up to me. I said I understood. I said I was tired. He kissed me goodnight. I drove away from the estate with his ring on my finger and a plan forming in my mind. The next morning I began research. If my job taught me anything, it taught me the power of information. I spent my workdays analyzing systems, finding weak points, documenting problems, designing solutions. Now I was going to apply those skills to the Whitmore family. Within days, I confirmed what I heard. The Whitmore dealerships were in serious trouble. Not a small rough patch. Real structural problems. They expanded too fast during good years. They took on too much debt. Now the bills were due. Their main franchise agreement was coming up for renewal, and the manufacturer was considering other options. The partnership with the Castellano family was not a smart plan. It was desperation. But I found more. I discovered evidence that Vivian had been taking money from the family business. At first it was small, hidden in expense reports, petty cash, small accounts. Over time it added up. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Money that funded her lifestyle while the company struggled. I printed everything. Financial statements. Suspicious transactions. Records that showed patterns. Documents that would matter. Then I started making calls. My grandmother's name still carried weight in certain business circles. People who worked with her decades ago still remembered the Graham name with respect. When I reached out, many were willing to talk. One contact mentioned Richard Hartley, the same Richard who was at the dinner. I learned that Richard had history with the Whitmores. Years ago, they cheated him in a business deal. Not illegal enough to get them arrested, but unethical enough to leave a lasting scar. Richard never forgot it. He had waited for a chance to even the score. Now I was bringing him an opportunity. Here is another moment that sounds like a story channel. Imagine me pausing to say I appreciate every like, comment, and subscription. Then imagine me returning to the story. The next few weeks were a lesson in patience and acting. I played the role of happy fiancé like a professional actress. I attended more dinners at the Whitmore estate. I smiled through Patricia's passive-aggressive comments. I watched Vivian show off designer clothes and jewelry, knowing exactly where some of that money came from. And I watched Marcus. He seemed different now, or maybe I was seeing him clearly for the first time. His attentiveness felt less like love and more like strategy. His compliments sounded rehearsed. He guarded his phone. It buzzed often. He always turned the screen away. I knew who was texting him. I had seen the name flash more than once. Alexandra. One evening I told Marcus I was working late. Instead, I parked near the restaurant where he claimed he was meeting a client. He was not meeting a client. He was meeting Alexandra. I watched through the window. They sat close. Their body language was intimate. At one point he took her hand across the table. At another moment she laughed and touched his face. I took photographs. Not for court, not for legal reasons, but because I wanted a clear memory of the truth. Marcus Whitmore was not only weak. He was a liar. He was maintaining 2 relationships while his family planned the outcome behind the scenes. I felt rage in my chest, hot and clean, like fire that burns away illusions. But I did not confront him. Not yet. I went home and added the photos to my growing file. Richard and I began meeting regularly, quietly, always out of sight. He had his own documentation of the Whitmores' questionable business behavior. He knew people they had hurt over the years. He was ready to help bring consequences. But he asked me why I was doing this. He understood his own reasons. He wanted to know mine. Was it revenge or something else? I thought about that carefully. I told him it was not only revenge. It was truth. The Whitmores had spent their lives using money and status to manipulate people. They treated anyone they considered beneath them as disposable. They would keep doing it to others long after I was gone. Someone needed to show them their money could not protect them from consequences forever. Richard listened and nodded slowly. He said my grandmother would be proud. That was the moment I felt sure I was on the right path. The engagement party was scheduled for 3 weeks later at the Whitmore estate. Patricia treated it like a coronation. A public display of the perfect family. She had no idea what was coming. For 3 weeks, I prepared. I coordinated quietly with Richard. I made strategic calls to industry contacts. I even reached out to the car manufacturer that was considering dropping the Whitmore dealerships. They were very interested in what I had to share. The night before the party, I gave Marcus one last chance. We sat in his apartment going over last-minute details. I asked him casually how he felt about us, about our future. He said he was excited. He said he could not wait to marry me. I asked if there was anything he wanted to tell me. Anything at all. He looked at me with those blue eyes that once seemed charming. He said there was nothing. He said I was everything he ever wanted. I asked about Alexandra. His face went pale. He recovered quickly, but I saw the flash of fear before he covered it. He said Alexandra was just an old friend, nothing more. I nodded and said I understood. And I did understand. Marcus would lie as long as it served him. He was his mother's son. The next evening, I put on a dress from my rail closet. Not the modest navy dress from the first dinner. This dress was designer and elegant. It cost more than everything Patricia wore combined. I looked at myself in the mirror and smiled. It was time to stop hiding. The estate was transformed for the engagement party. White tents spread across the lawn. Crystal chandeliers hung from temporary structures, throwing sparkling light. A string quartet played classical music near a fountain. Waiters moved through the crowd with champagne and expensive appetizers. Patricia had built a spectacle, not a celebration. I arrived in my usual Subaru. I watched the valet stare at my car like it was an insult among the Mercedes and BMWs. One valet even asked if I was with the catering company. I smiled and handed him my keys. Then I began walking toward the main tent. With every step, I felt myself shedding the role I had played. The nervous girlfriend. The grateful fiancé. The simple woman who should be thankful for Patricia grudging acceptance. Tonight I was myself. My dress was a deep emerald green, custom fit. My jewelry was subtle but unmistakably high quality to anyone who understood real wealth. My grandmother's diamond pendant rested at my throat. It was worth more than many cars. My watch was a limited edition that only a small number of people owned. I had hidden who I was for 14 months. Tonight I stopped hiding. The first person to notice me was a woman near the entrance. She looked at me, did a double take, and whispered to someone beside her. They stared. I kept walking. The second person to notice was Harold. He was greeting guests near the bar, playing host. When he saw me, his smile froze. His eyes moved over my dress and jewelry, and confusion replaced his practiced politeness. I greeted him warmly and thanked him for hosting such a lovely party. He stammered, still trying to solve the puzzle. I moved on. The main tent was filled with about 100 guests. Business associates. Society people. Family friends. I recognized some from research. A representative from the car manufacturer. A journalist from a local business publication. Owners of competing dealerships. A woman who worked in mergers and acquisitions. And there, near the champagne fountain, stood Patricia, holding court. She wore a cream-colored gown that was expensive but not unique. She wore jewelry impressive to ordinary eyes, but not truly remarkable. She had not seen me yet. I took a champagne glass from a waiter and moved through the crowd. I introduced myself to several guests along the way. Each interaction followed the same pattern. Confusion at my appearance. Surprise when I said I was Marcus' fiancé. Then deeper confusion as my manner and presence did not match whatever story the Whitmores had been spreading. Whispers began to travel. Phones appeared. People searched quietly. Names were checked. Good. I finally reached Patricia's circle, just as she finished telling a story about charity work. She turned to greet the newcomer with her frozen smile. Then her expression changed in stages. Confusion. Recognition. Disbelief. And then something that looked like fear. She said my name like it was a question. I greeted her politely and thanked her for the beautiful party. Her eyes moved rapidly, taking in every detail. The dress. The pendant. The watch. She asked where I got these things, voice tight. I said they were pieces I saved for a special occasion. Vivian appeared beside Patricia, drawn by some invisible alarm. She looked at me and went through the same reaction. Confusion. Recognition. Disbelief. Then she recovered and tried to attack. She asked if my dress was a rental, with a sweet voice that dripped poison. I calmly told her the designer's name. I said he was a friend. The name hit her like a slap. It was a designer who dressed celebrities, who did not create custom work for assistants who could barely pay rent. Vivian opened her mouth but did not know what to say. I excused myself to find Marcus. Behind me I heard Patricia hiss to Vivian to find out what was going on. I kept walking. Marcus found me first. He came out of a group near the bar, face pale, eyes wide. He had heard whispers. He had seen looks. He was trying to match the woman in front of him with the woman he thought he knew. He asked what was happening. He asked why I looked like a different person. I told him I looked like myself. He stared, and I saw the first crack in his assumptions. He asked to talk privately. I said later. I reminded him it was our engagement party and we had guests. Then I took his arm and guided him toward a group of industry people. These were the people whose opinions mattered to the Whitmore's survival. They watched us with curiosity. I introduced myself properly, using my full name and my real job title. When I said my company name, I saw expressions shift. Recognition. Respect. One man said he had heard of me. A woman asked if I was related to Margaret Graham. I said she was my grandmother. The woman's eyebrows rose. She said my grandmother was a remarkable businesswoman. The Graham name still carried weight. Marcus tensed beside me. He did not know any of this. He never asked deeper questions. He assumed poor meant unimportant. He never bothered to look further. That was his mistake. The party continued. With each conversation, the truth spread. People whispered, checked phones, connected dots. The narrative beneath the Whitmore's feet started to move. Richard arrived about an hour into the party. He found me near the rose garden while Marcus was pulled away by Harold. Richard told me the manufacturer's representative was here. He said the representative had reviewed documentation Richard shared earlier. I asked if Richard was ready. He said he had been ready for years. Then he vanished back into the crowd. Patricia finally cornered me. She had regained some control, but the strain showed around her eyes. She grabbed my arm with a grip stronger than necessary and demanded to know what I was doing. I asked what she meant. She said I knew exactly what she meant. The dress. The jewelry. The job details. The family name. She asked what my game was. I told her there was no game. I told her I was simply being myself. Patricia said that was impossible. She said Marcus told her about my circumstances. She said I was a secretary in a studio apartment driving a junkyard car. I calmly said Marcus made assumptions. I said I never told him I was poor. I said I told him I worked in tech, which was true. I said I supported the team, which was also true. I said I never claimed I was struggling. I simply never corrected their assumptions. Patricia's face went still. She asked why. I looked her directly in the eyes. I told her my grandmother taught me that you see a person's true character when they think no one important is watching. I told her I wanted to see who the Whitmores really were. I told her now I knew. Before she could respond, the string quartet stopped. Harold's voice came over a speaker, announcing it was time for speeches and toasts. Patricia looked at me with fear behind her frozen smile. I walked toward the stage. The main event was ready. The stage stood at the far end of the tent with flowers and soft lighting meant to feel romantic. Harold welcomed guests, thanked them, and spoke about family, tradition, and strong partnerships in business and life. His eyes kept darting to Patricia. Patricia took the microphone smoothly, smile perfect again. She said she was thrilled to celebrate her son's engagement. She said Marcus found a wonderful young woman. She spoke about legacy, about the Whitmore future, about exciting plans. Then she began hinting at business, talking about growth, expansion, partnerships. I saw the manufacturer's representative shift uncomfortably. Richard caught the representative's eye and nodded slightly. Patricia was building toward something. She called Marcus to the stage. He climbed up, nervous behind his forced smile. Then Patricia said one more person should join them. She announced my name. All eyes turned to me. I set down my champagne and walked toward the stage. The tent fell silent except for my steps. I climbed the stairs and stood beside Marcus. He reached for my hand, uncertain. Patricia handed me the microphone with a smile that did not reach her eyes. She said she was sure I wanted to say a few words. I held the microphone and looked out at the crowd. I looked at Marcus. I looked at Patricia. I looked at the people who could destroy or save the Whitmores. I said yes, I did want to say a few words. Then I began. I thanked Patricia for the welcome she gave me. The crowd shifted, sensing something unusual. I said I wanted to acknowledge the Whitmores for showing me exactly who they were over the past few weeks. Patricia's smile flickered. I said that when I first came to their home, I made a choice to show them a simple version of myself, without expensive clothes or impressive titles, a woman they might consider beneath their notice. The tent became silent. I said I wanted to see how they would treat someone they believed could not help them. Someone they believed had nothing to offer. Someone they believed was, in Patricia words, common. Patricia's face drained of color. I described that first dinner. I described the whispered insult about me looking like the help. I described being compared to Alexandra. I described being called common. Marcus stared at me, horror spreading over his face. Then I said there was more. I said I heard a conversation I was not supposed to hear. I described the hallway. I described Patricia and Vivian planning how to remove me. I described learning I was a placeholder. I described learning Marcus was supposed to end up with Alexandra for business reasons. Gasps moved through the crowd. I said I learned the Whitmore dealerships were in serious financial trouble. I said they were desperate for a merger with the Castellano family. I said Marcus was keeping his options open with Alexandra the entire time we were together. Then I held up my phone and showed one of the photos. Marcus and Alexandra at a restaurant, close, hands touching. I said it was taken while Marcus claimed he was working. The crowd burst into whispers. Marcus grabbed my arm and tried to speak, saying it was not what it looked like, saying he could explain. I told him he already explained. I told him I gave him a chance to be honest the night before, and he lied. Then I turned back to the crowd. I said there was more. The tent quieted again. I said I researched the Whitmore business. I mentioned the debt, the overexpansion, the looming franchise renewal, and the manufacturer's doubts. Harold's face turned gray. Then I said I found evidence of something more serious. I looked directly toward Vivian. I said Vivian had been taking money from the family business for years. At first small, hidden amounts. Then larger. Now hundreds of thousands. Vivian shouted that I was lying. She said I had no proof. She called me bitter. Richard stepped forward. He said there was proof. He carried a folder. He handed it to the manufacturer's representative. He said he had his own documentation and was happy to add it. He said the Whitmores cheated him years ago and he never forgot. Patricia tried to regain control. She called it outrageous. She threatened lawsuits. I told her she could try. I told her everything was documented and verifiable. Then I said there was one last thing. I removed the ring from my finger. The cloudy diamond caught the chandelier light. I said I would not be marrying Marcus Whitmore. I said I never truly intended to, not after learning the truth. I said I only accepted the proposal to give them enough rope to reveal themselves publicly. I handed the ring back to Marcus. I suggested he give it to Alexandra, since she was clearly the person he kept in his life. Marcus' face crumpled. He insisted he had feelings for me. He tried to blame his mother, calling it business. I told him that was the problem. He let his mother run his life. He never defended me when his family attacked me. He lied to my face even when I gave him a chance. A man who cannot be honest is not a man I would marry. The tent went silent again, the kind of silence that feels heavy and final. Then I introduced myself properly to everyone. I said my full name. I said my real job title. I said I earned more in a month than many people earn in a year. And I said I lived simply because my grandmother taught me that money is not the measure of worth. I said the Whitmores showed their character when they believed I had nothing to offer. I said that kind of character eventually destroys itself. Then I set the microphone down and walked off the stage. The crowd parted. No one stopped me. Behind me, chaos began. Patricia's voice rose high, trying to control the situation, insisting it was a misunderstanding. I heard people whispering, leaving quickly, distancing themselves. I heard the manufacturer's representative speaking into a phone with clipped professional words. Harold slumped into a chair like a man whose world was collapsing. Vivian argued with her husband near the bar. Her husband looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. And Marcus stood on the stage holding the ring, looking lost. I did not look back. I walked out into the cool night air. The stars were bright overhead, indifferent to human drama. I took a deep breath. The air felt cleaner. Richard found me by the fountain a few minutes later. He said it was done. He said the manufacturer already made the decision. The Whitmore dealerships would lose their franchise agreement by the end of the month. I asked Richard how he felt. He said satisfaction was not the right word. He said it felt like relief, like a long unpaid debt finally settled. I understood. He asked what I would do now. I said I would go home. I said I would sleep well for the first time in weeks. I said tomorrow I would return to the life I built for myself, a life that had nothing to do with Marcus or his family. Richard nodded and said again that my grandmother would be proud. For a moment, tears pressed at my eyes. I told him I hoped so. He handed me a business card and told me to call if I ever needed anything. I thanked him. Then I walked to the valet area, collected my Subaru from a very confused attendant, and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I saw guests streaming out. I saw Patricia gesturing wildly, still trying to control a narrative that was already dead. I faced forward and did not look again. The drive home was quiet. No radio. No calls. Only road and night, and distance growing between me and the mess I left behind. When I reached my modest apartment, I sat in my car for a long moment. I thought about Marcus. About the man I believed he was. About the man he turned out to be. I thought about how close I came to marrying him. How close I came to tying my life to a family that would have treated me with contempt forever. I thought about my grandmother and her lesson about character. Then I went inside. My apartment was small and simple, and it felt safe. I made tea. I changed out of the designer dress and into an old, comfortable robe. I sat by the window and watched city lights. Thousands of lives in thousands of windows. My life was one of them. Not special. Not a spectacle. And that was exactly how I wanted it. 1 week later, I sat at my kitchen table drinking morning coffee when my phone buzzed with a news alert. The headline said the Whitmore automotive business was facing closure after franchise termination. I opened the article and read slowly. The manufacturer ended the partnership, citing concerns about financial management and ethical behavior. Without a franchise agreement, the dealerships could not sell new vehicles. Without new sales, the business could not survive. The article mentioned former partners stepping forward with complaints. It mentioned an internal investigation revealing financial irregularities. It mentioned Vivian being asked to step down while authorities reviewed records. It did not mention me. I asked Richard to keep my name out of it, and he honored that. I did not want fame. I did not want recognition. I only wanted truth. My phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from Marcus. He said he needed to see me. He said he could explain everything. He said he made mistakes but still cared about me. He asked if we could meet for coffee just to talk. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I deleted it. Some doors should stay closed. I stood up and went to the window. Morning light spread across the city. It was going to be a beautiful day. A day for moving forward. A day for new beginnings. My grandmother's pendant rested warm against my skin. I touched it gently. I thought about her, about how she lived simply not because she had to, but because she understood what mattered could not be bought. Love, integrity, self-respect. The calm knowledge that you acted according to your principles, even when it would have been easier to stay quiet. The Whitmores believed money and status made them untouchable. They believed they could treat people however they wanted. They believed consequences were for other people. They were wrong. I turned from the window and got ready for work. My normal job at my normal company, doing work I loved with people who respected me for skill and character, not a bank account. The Whitmore story would continue in the coming weeks and months. Investigations. Legal consequences. Reputations ruined. An empire built on arrogance and deception crumbling piece by piece. But that was their story now. Not mine. My story was beginning again on my terms. My grandmother taught me that a person's worth is not measured by money, status, or the approval of people like Patricia Whitmore. It is measured by character. By choices made when no one is watching. By how you treat people who cannot do anything for you. The Whitmores failed that test completely. And I finally got the answer I came for. I did not need their approval. I did not need Marcus' love. I did not need anyone to validate my worth. I already knew who I was. And that was enough.